So just a few days ago, I brought you a video with Debbie Wasserman Schultz where she was just lying in front of Congress and defaming and slandering Robert Kennedy Jr. Well, I've got another one for you. This one, this time, is Miss Sanchez. She is the Democrat representative from California and apparently a law scholar. So today, we're going to find out how much she actually knows about the law and if we can always trust the expert. But first, go ahead and like and subscribe.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Plaskett. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, anti-Asian hate and violence skyrocketed as some racists blamed a virus coming out of China on all Asian Americans. Since March of 2020, Stop AAPI Hate, a nonprofit organization aimed at tracking and addressing anti-Asian hate, reported more than 11,000 anti-Asian acts of hate and violence. This same report found that 49% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have experienced some form of discrimination. These acts of hate include Asian Americans being beaten, spit on, screamed at, and even
She
killed.
won't tell you who's
And the
responsible
increases in
for
these
those
types
acts
of
of hate,
attacks during
though,
COVID
conveniently.
accompanied a
Look
slew
it
of
up.
anti-Chinese sentiments related to the virus, like calling it the quote-unquote China virus and even disgustingly quote-unquote Kung flu. Many Asian Americans were harassed, physically
Wu flu.
accosted, and told that they quote-unquote created the virus. Yet one of our Republican witnesses encourages this appalling rhetoric and promotes anti-Asian hate with dangerous and unfounded claims. Just last week, Mr. Kennedy suggested COVID-19 was a bioweapon and said it was, quote, targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people, end quote, and that, quote, the people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese, end quote, suggesting that the Chinese people didn't suffer like others during
Now,
the
if you
pandemic.
watched my last video,
Despite
you'll
asserting that he
see
should
how
become their
everything she
president,
just said
Mr.
is an
Kennedy seems
absolute
to
lie.
disregard the correlation
And if you
between
think she's telling
anti-Asian
the truth,
rhetoric
go watch
and
my
violence.
last video.
Ms. Wiley, do you frequently work with minority communities, including Chinese American or other Asian American communities?
I do.
And do you think Mr. Kennedy's theory is racist?
I think that
Mr. Kennedy's theory is racist?
Mr. Kennedy's statements fuels the theories that suggest that there's a biology to race and that therefore we can actually identify people in communities as possibly either being benefited by or being people who are not sharing the same interests and needs as the rest of us. And yes, that has served to drive hate and bias, and sadly, including violent incidents.
Now, it was said earlier in this hearing that Mr. Kennedy is a smart man. Now, so far as I know, he does not have any specific education or training in medicine. He is not an epidemiologist, one who studies infectious diseases. He has never conducted clinical trials in a professional setting. He has never done scientific research in a professional laboratory and published scientific findings in a peer-reviewed publication. Ms. Wiley, what kind of harm does someone with absolutely no medical training or knowledge do when they espouse unfounded anti-Asian vaccine theories during a fraught
That's all a
time
lie,
like
too,
COVID?
you know that.
One of the things that happened in this historic pandemic was that there was certainly a need to get on top of very quickly what the science said. I am not a scientist either. And so what social media platforms did was go and speak to government agencies because their own policies, their own user agreements
Because
required
those
them to look
government
at and figure out what the
agencies were the
facts
only
were
ones
so
who
that
had
they
the
could assess
truth.
what was responsible and what was not responsible to
They
be
were
posted.
they were
I
the
say
arbiter
that
of what was
because it was
responsible.
incredibly important to ensure that people were getting real-time information as possible, but also ones that really demonstrated what all
It's
of
like
us
she's
need,
talking to a 3-year-old.
rather than where and how we should
She really thinks
ascribe blame,
the people
or
she's
where
talking to
and
are
how we should
stupid.
consider who benefits and who doesn't, because we were all harmed.
Yeah.
But I say this in part because it was the social media platforms themselves that reached out to government agencies, including
Oh, it was
Health
them
and Human
themselves, huh?
Services and CDC, to get
That's a
that
lie.
information. And under the vacated opinion, which is
Remember that
really
word?
important to understand, it has been vacated by the Fifth Circuit, this preliminary injunction on all these incidents that we're talking about, because because one of the things it would do, in my view, just as in my legal view, is that it was actually saying that the government could not respond to such requests under this injunction, which is incredibly overbroad, dangerous, and doesn't allow government agencies to do what they are chartered to do.
Now, I'm an attorney by training, and one of the things I learned very early on in constitutional law is that no right given to the people of the United States is absolute, and that includes
by who?
the right to free speech. Because you do not have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater, because it could produce harm and death of people by being false. These social
this is
media
going to require
platforms
a
have
cutscene.
user
So I want to point out the absolute absurdity of what this woman just said. She claims to be an expert. She went to law school. But she just said that our rights are given to us with limits. And that's absolutely untrue. That's absolutely not the way things work here in America. Our rights are given to us by God, and the Constitution protects the government from infringing on those rights. So, for one, she misunderstands the Constitution, which is pretty dangerous to have someone like that representing someone in Congress. But the other thing is this whole yelling fire in a theater. People keep using this. Even Biden uses this over and over, but it's a fallacy. And it's been debunked for years. It's not anything that's like new. But people keep repeating it and using it as their reasoning for limiting the First Amendment and saying that not all amendments are absolute. Well, you know that's false then, because the argument they're using to prove that argument is false. But they still want us to trust the experts, right?
policies to try to prevent that kind of harm. Is that not correct, Ms. Wiley?
That is correct.
And so we are not trying
She
to
wasn't
censor
corrected
speech.
at all.
We are simply trying to create factually correct information to prevent harm to people, including
Create
death. And that's what
factually correct information.
they were trying to do during COVID. Is that not correct?
Legally speaking, absolutely. And I say that as a matter of law, which is that court cases say that the government has in fact, it's its role to ask for compliance with policies. The policies on the books of social media platforms were violated. And they
Excuse
said
me,
those,
Mr. Chairman, but the last questioner got an additional extra minute. I'm at 35 seconds over. I would just
Point of order,
ask that
Mr.
she
Chairman.
be
The
able to
Democrat
finish-
beforehand got an extra
finish
minute.
her sentence.
Trying to be generous.
Finish her
trying to
sentence.
be generous, even when the response is that the government determines the truth.
I
I'm trying
would
to be
like for her
generous.
to be able to finish her sentence, Mr. Chairman, then I will yield back.
Okay, Ms. Wiley, you can finish your sentence.
Thank
Let's
you.
hear
I'm
Ms.
not sure I
Wiles.
remember the sentence, but
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
I just think the
I
point
do.
was,
I do. You were saying
there's
the
a
government
record-
should be the arbiter
Can
of
you
what's
please
truth.
not put
That's
words into
actually-
the mouth of the witness and let her respond?
The
It's
chair now
her
recognizes
Pretty
the
much what she said.
gentlelady from New York, the gentlelady
All right.
from California.
I love
Now let's go back to those words. Remember, vacated, vacated.
The vacated opinion.
Now this is going to require us to go back to the future. And let's hear if those words that Ms. Wiley spoke were 100% accurate.
And third, Mr. Sauer, who we're about to speak with, serving as lead counsel in the landmark lawsuit against the federal government on this issue. Let's talk facts. The American people are not aware of the magnitude of this case, Mr. Sauer, and its profound implications, because most of the mainstream media is in on it too, and they're trying to bury the story. In brief, in May of last year, the attorneys general of my state, Louisiana, and the state of Missouri filed suit in U.S. District Court of the Western District of Louisiana. This blatant censorship. They went after the blatant censorship by the Biden White House in 9 of its federal agencies. 2 weeks ago on Independence Day, the district court issued a truly extraordinary 155-page court opinion, a ruling granting the plaintiff's request for preliminary injunction. Mr. Sauer, your lead counsel in that litigation. You referenced some in your opening statement, but let's do it again here because they don't seem to be paying attention. Can you give a summary again of some of the key components of that opinion and the basis for it? I know you mentioned there were 82 pages of detailed factual findings, right?
That is correct. 82 pages, 577 citations of the record evidence. That evidence is drawn from about 20,000 pages of the government's own communications with social media platforms and 6 full-length depositions of senior federal officials with firsthand knowledge of federal censorship practices.
It's absolutely staggering. And now they've tried to bury this and say, well, the Fifth Circuit entered a temporary administrative stay. They granted a an expedited briefing and oral argument, however, for August 10th. What's the impact of that? Isn't that routine practice in the Fifth Circuit?
That's a direct quote from the recent Fifth Circuit decision, N. Ray Abbott, which is cited in my written testimony. It's legally incorrect, clearly legally incorrect to describe them as vacating the injunction, which has happened multiple times.
They either don't know the law or, I don't know, they're trying to obscure the facts. That's a theme around here. The White House and the fellow Democrats disputed almost none of the factual findings in the court. Isn't that right?
So far, we've had 2 emergency stay motions from the Department of Justice, one in the district court, one in the Court of Appeals. And what really struck me in reading those is they just don't dispute those 82 pages of factual findings. Almost none of them are directly disputed in what they've filed so far.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. If you're still here, thank you for sticking around this long. And go ahead and hit that like button and hit the subscribe. Help us grow this little family here. And I hope to see you on the next one. Until then, peace be with you.